Hi, I'm Tomás Vázquez Rojas, Research Assistant at the Cyber Justice Laboratory at the University of Montreal. Thank you for joining today's webinar. If you experience technical difficulties at any point, please exit the meeting and re-enter using the link provided. You will notice at the bottom of your screen the option Q&A or Q&R for French-speaking users. We invite you to use this option instead of the chat window to ask your questions. A member of the Cyber Justice Lab team will take your questions as we go along, and then they will be asked to our panelists at the end of the webinar. For those of you who wish to receive a certificate of assistance for your continuing education, we'll be sending you a link through the chat box during the Q&A period. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. So the Cyber Justice Laboratory is a research center that explores the interplay between new technologies and the law. We are currently conducting the project Autonomy Through Cyber Justice Technologies, founded by the 2017 competition of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Our project brings together more than 50 researchers and 45 partners dedicated to the use of technologies and artificial intelligence for the prevention and resolution of conflicts. Over the coming months, the Cyber Justice Lab will be hosting a series of online activities that will gather the opinions and experiences of legal experts from around the world on the recent events. From ethical issues to crisis management, including analysis of the achievements and failures of technology shift in the legal field, the laboratory will present varied and relevant content. Stay tuned by checking our social networks and visiting our website, cyberjustice.ca. Our topic for this activity is access to justice and marginalized groups. We will specifically tackle the issue of informing the public of their rights in times of crisis. For this talk, we have the pleasure of receiving Jean-Paul Bevilacqua, adjunct professor at the Osgoode Hall Law School and assistant director at the Winkler Institute for Dispute Resolution. We also have with us Julie Mathews, who is executive director of Clio, Community Legal Education Ontario, and finally, Katie Sykes, who is Associate Professor at Thompson Rivers University Faculty of Law. So to start the discussion, each one of our panelists will present the different projects that they have been working on since the beginning of the pandemic. Jean-Paul, let's start with you.
Merci, Thomas. And first, let me thank you for organizing this and for Cyber Justice for hosting this panel, and Julie and Katie, I know we've circled around each other and each other's work, and it's a pleasure to finally get to have this kind of discussion with you. So I'm looking forward to this next hour and a half. So let me give a little bit of context to basically why I'm a little square in your screen right now, and explain the work that we're doing at Osgoode and the Winkler Institute. And first, I'm going to start off by defining those two things because they're coming from different perspectives. So as Thomas mentioned, I'm a professor in the mediation program at Osgoode Hall Law School, and part of that work is co-directing with my colleague Martha Simmons the Osgoode Mediation Clinic, which is a mediation clinic that is primarily staffed by students as a part of their clinical work in the mediation intensive program. And we provide two primary services: mediation services themselves, and then conflict resolution training and conflict coaching. And we provide those both for groups and individuals on campus, as well as for the broader community that surrounds York and the GTA. Secondly, the Winkler Institute is a research center that is housed within Osgoode, but is its own entity. It was formed in 2014, named for the former Chief Justice of Ontario, Warren Winkler. Our mandate encompasses access to justice, alternative dispute resolution, and innovation. And so, that has been our area of focus since our inception, and has been called to the forefront given this pandemic. So let me first say the question I asked myself, because the question was, what are we offering during this pandemic and how has that changed or not changed? And the immediate answer that came to mind is both everything has changed and nothing has changed. So what I mean by that is, and I want to talk a little bit about legal education, because I know our audience has many of those stakeholders here. We still have a commitment to our students to provide hands-on concrete clinical work through the Osgoode Mediation Clinic, along with our community partners, such as St. Stephen's Community House, Peace Builders, and Laws, which is works within high schools in the community. And so we still have a commitment to our students and to the communities that serves, those initiatives serves, to actually still provide services, right? So it's not like we can go dark. So in that sense, nothing has changed. What has changed, of course, is that this all has to happen primarily virtually and remotely. And much like, I assume we're going to be taking a broader look at all this, this has been a real kick in the pants to walk the walk in terms of innovation and actually utilizing the tools that are out there that tons of other industries use in terms of providing services online, talking about apps on our phone, and really kind of catching up. And so my hope for us, as we act as a microcosm of the justice system as the whole, is that we use this opportunity and not waste this crisis. I think it was Winston Churchill that, and I'm going to paraphrase him in not so great of a way, but not to waste a crisis. Make sure that no crisis is wasted. So for me, because I have the privilege of not having to worry about some basic survival tools here and getting through this pandemic and worrying about housing, worrying about food, I think it is our responsibility as justice professionals to actually capitalize and walk the walk and actually serve the public during this pandemic and going forward, right? So to that end, and I'll wrap up because we'll come back to this through the questions, but we're getting ready to launch a purely virtual mediation service next month. And the students have been working on that in terms of best practices and how we can actually reach the communities that still need these services during this time. Because let's remember, conflict doesn't go away during a pandemic, right? People are cooped up a lot of the time, and this exacerbates things. So we have our mind turned to the necessity of providing these services. And finally, I'll give you an example in terms of the Winkler Institute piece. One of our projects is a youth-centered and directed project by Indigenous youth called Indigenous Youth Designing a Better Justice System. And it's a Law Foundation of Ontario project that gathers in a group of youth leadership team to design a public legal education tool in a form of an app designed by Indigenous youth for an Indigenous youth audience to learn about their rights. So that work continues, but it can't continue virtually because not everyone has access to be able to participate like we are doing right now. So, that is something that I want to consider when we're talking about marginalized communities. We're talking with a group of people that all have access to talk about this discussion and to talk about these issues, and that's not the case for everyone, and that's not the case for all the communities that we're going to be discussing. So although we have a couple of, I believe, marginalized communities represented by the individuals in this discussion, we don't have all of them, and I do want to keep our mind to those communities as well. And with that, I will end it there and pass it over to my next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. So let's go with you, Julie.
Okay, so mine is probably, it's not nearly so thoughtful. I'm going to walk you through some of the work that Clio has been doing. So I can pull up my screen, can I?
Yes.
Okay. Put over there. Okay, so quickly, and I'm trying to time myself. Okay, so I'm from Community Legal Education Ontario. We are an independent, not-for-profit charitable organization in Toronto. We have a province-wide mandate. We what we are is a specialty public legal education and information organization, so PLEI. There's one of us in each province, one sort of primary plea provider in every province. Clio is part of the legal aid community legal clinic system in Ontario, so our mandate does focus on reaching low-income, socially disadvantaged, marginalized communities about with information about their legal rights, working with a bunch of other partners to do that. So we produce a lot of different legal information in different formats in a variety of languages, and we get it out there through a bunch of different pathways. The second part of our mandate is to support community workers, sort of what we're calling these days trusted intermediaries, the sort of go-to in-between people that, you know, every ordinary people who don't go to a lawyer in the first instance, they turn to somebody in the community they trust. So the second part of our mandate and focus these days is to support the huge number of diverse community workers across the province. So the pandemic, you know, challenged marginalized communities hugely, as has already been said, and therefore it challenged us hugely in terms of being able to respond adequately to it. So I'll never forget that first week. Anyway, you know what? I was thinking as I was working on this, how many different case studies of different things that we did, that worked, that didn't, you know, be an interesting little, well, at least to me, piece, because they're just, we tried a lot. So I'll just show you. So we added this red bar, COVID-19 Get Updates on the Law and Legal Services on Steps to Justice. So Steps to Justice is our premier website where people can go online for information, for people who have digital literacy skills and access. We have focused on the needs of marginalized communities, and we support trusted intermediaries as conduits to those people. And we do our stuff in a bunch of different ways. So soon after the pandemic took off, we knew we were getting lots of questions, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, about legal rights in this environment. And so we pulled together, we called on every sort of lawyer. Clio relies on frontline lawyers and paralegals and other experts to tell us what they're hearing in terms of legal rights, including legal questions, including community workers, and they work with us to develop the content because they're at the front lines, and they can give the practical information that where we do have lawyers and editors on staff, we hear from them. So we don't just sit and dream up what people need to hear about. So we added this bar on our site, a whole section that grew over time. Initially, it was just a page to add, I think that they're now, and you see the topics over on the right, I think there are 130 questions in English in those 11 or 12 topics, and then 130 on the French sister site. So in all these various areas of law. And so, you know, people can go, employment and work is by far the most sought after, the most visited section of our COVID-19 topics. And then this particular question, who can get the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, is certainly the most clicked on question. So on this one, I think we've had about 80,000 page views per week on this COVID content over the last month, and then 40 to 50,000 page views of this particular question by and large. One week it was, I think, 93,000 visits to this, but generally around 40 to 50. Our general traffic to Steps to Justice is about, last year I think we had 4.5 million visitors to the site. So we get a lot of traffic here. It's the Steps to Justice generally is a multi-partner initiative, so we don't get all the credit. And certainly in this case, it was so interesting how many people stepped up and lent a hand from the legal profession and from other areas. So including a lot of our legal clinic partners. So that has been great. So one thing that we realized early on was that we couldn't we were getting, we have a live chat service on our site, and you can see this down here. We were offering, before the pandemic started, 1 session a day. That demand became overwhelming, doubled pretty quickly, live chat questions. We were getting twice as many emails as usual. So we ramped it all up. We doubled the number of live chat sessions. So now we're getting, I think, about 250 or 300 a week in those 10 sessions. And we were hearing a lot of questions, of course, through the live chat as well as through emails. So one of the things we did, and I kind of find this cool for us because it's not something we usually do, is we developed a way of tracking questions. So we opened up, and so we set up, some brilliant people at Clio set up some Google Docs where we could track the questions we were hearing. So we could track the questions we were hearing. So the staff, different lawyers, different staff people, doing various pieces of work, and everyone's trying to come together, and we knew we needed a central document. So we started to track, this is, I think, about 121 pages of all the questions we were getting from people and from community workers that we were trying to make sure we'd answered somehow in Steps to Justice. We found it overwhelming, and then we started doing these are just the new questions. These are the new questions that we haven't yet felt that we've given a full answer. So they're in various areas of law, employment, family. So we have been much more, we have used Google Docs in a bunch of different ways. Sorry, I meant to show you our general Google Docs page, but I think I lost it. Anyway, so to track our work, so that we could, track what we were hearing, and we could monitor what we were doing and make sure we were answering the questions. So, that was pretty key. So what did so there we have. So then the other thing we did is we were trying to just keep up on the stats, because people were asking us. We were trying to find out, figure out in real time what questions were being asked a lot, what people were looking for. And so again, somebody at Clio, and this was quite creative, they created this real-time dashboard so that we can actually, look at any time. You can set the date, and you can see what questions people are visiting. There's a lot that you can, that's on Steps to Justice generally, and this is on COVID-19 content. So this has been pretty cool for us. We're wondering if there's any way we can turn it into sort of a public tool. I'm not sure how many members of the public would be interested in it, even if we think it's cool, but I've seen it something like this on a couple of sites, and I find it interesting. So we created that. So we've been doing all kinds of things we didn't do before, and we've been doing them in, quickly, sort of almost rapid fire. Once in a while, we get something slightly wrong. We hope we hear about it, and we usually do 2 or 3 times. We fix it. But, that's part of the learning. So the other things I wanted to mention very quickly is we have also tried to create resources that we know are in really high demand right now. And of course, people are thinking about powers of attorney and simple wills, or wills of any sort, simple or complicated. And we had been sort of working in this area for a while, but we hadn't gotten our big initiatives off the ground. So just about a month ago, we completed our work on guided pathways to preparing a power of attorney. Now, I think this is going to be the topic of another cyber justice webinar coming up. I won't say too much about it, but these are interviews that take people through a power of attorney for personal care, as well as a power of attorney, continuing power of attorney for property, and ask them a series of questions, integrates legal information, and learn more, so that the complicated language on the form, or on the typical power of attorney piece, is explained. And so it kind of looks, I did save something. It takes people through something like this. Let me move my little black bar. Yeah, it takes people through something like this, and they can, question per screen, they can answer the questions, and at the end, it automatically populates a power of attorney. So that's just hot off the press. As I said, a simple bill is coming soon. And then finally, lastly, I don't want to take up too much more time. We have our site, Clio Connect, is a site designed specifically for community workers, for trusted intermediaries, for adult educators, sort of as the bridge to people, and the main go-to people for others who have legal problems. And so here, we have been doing, and this isn't something we usually do, but we have been coordinating, pulling together, working with partners to create training webinars for community workers, so that they can ask the questions that they're hearing from their clients. And so we just did the third one today, and each of these three, I think, we maxed out the registration at 500 community workers for each one. So, and they're on a variety of topics. We're going to, I think, do one on the power of attorney, some on family law, one not before long. And so, you know, you can see the archive, or you can sign up live. Today, we actually managed to bring in an Asl interpreter. The interesting thing is, of course, we try to keep the presenters from talking for too long because people have lots of questions. And so I think the first webinar, we had about 280 questions through live chat during the course of the webinar. So, so I think those have been very well received and appreciated. So that's about all I wanted to say, except I forgot to say thank you to Cyber Justice folks for inviting me, and those of you who are attending. I'd love to hear your questions.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. So let's go with you, Katie.
Okay. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Thanks from me too. It's really, it's quite a thrill to be here, and great company to be in. So I am a law professor, and so I'm not really sort of like a frontline worker in providing justice services to marginalized people like Julie is. And I work a lot with students. So there's two things I'll talk about. One really briefly, I am doing an ongoing research project which started before all of this, in the before times, but has a connection. So I'm doing research on BC's Civil Resolution Tribunal, which I think is becoming fairly well known in BC and maybe not as well known outside of BC. It's an online court, although it's technically actually an administrative tribunal, but it's part of the public justice system. And it was designed to be, to provide better access to ordinary people. It's a very innovative approach to dispute resolution. It's available entirely online, although it can be done by telephone for people who are uncomfortable with that, or by going to a Service Canada location and working with a worker to go through it. But most people access it online. It has a built-in self-help tool called the Solution Explorer, which is a little bit similar to the kind of guided pathways sort of approach that Julie was just showing us. So the first step for anyone who uses the Civil Resolution Tribunal, at least if they're considering starting a dispute, is they can go through this tool and learn something about their rights and be given some information sheets and potentially other tools like form letters that may suffice to sort out the problem without it going to filing a claim. And if they then file a claim, there's a couple of other steps to sort of facilitate resolution of the dispute. And then the final stop is having a tribunal member decide their dispute. So why this is suddenly kind of extra relevant in the pandemic is, like every other jurisdiction, around the middle of March, BC basically shut down all its courts, and only kind of essential services were happening. And that they had to, like all the other courts, they had to kind of use technology that had not been much used before. And the Civil Resolution Tribunal just continued doing everything the same way it always had. So for people who are following this stuff, you may have seen Richard Susskind started a website called Remote Courts Worldwide that's tracking how justice systems around the world are kind of improvising and adapting in the crisis. And there's a piece on the Civil Resolution Tribunal there, which is really interesting because I think it's the only one that says, you know, we didn't do anything differently. We just kept going. The people who work there generally also work remotely because there's no reason for them not to. So other than extending some filing deadlines and stuff, it was just business as usual, which to me says a lot. I mean, I was converted before the pandemic, thinking this is, you know, obviously this is more of this should be in the justice system, but after this crisis, I think the CRT has kind of made the case for itself that it can provide this continuity of service in a seamless way, and that's very valuable right now. So the other piece I wanted to talk about really was triggered by the pandemic, and it happened organically, and it started with a student. Actually a group of students, but kind of started with one. And he experienced a family member lost his job because of the pandemic. And I was thinking about the focus on marginalized communities, and it started me thinking, you know, in this context, there's a lot of people who are dealing with some aspects of being marginalized who might not really have had to deal with that before. The concept of marginalized communities is sort of changing almost before our eyes. So, I mean, generally speaking, the students I work with are relatively privileged. They have access to a legal education, although for many, many of them are first generation, and paying for it is a struggle. But still, we're a relatively privileged community. And I think people are getting a new kind of firsthand and concrete awareness of the challenges of things like job loss and having to deal with government benefits. So this student was sort of inspired to help his family member find out about the supports that were available, found out it was really complicated, started applying his legal analysis skills and pulling it all together and summarizing everything the way he's been trained to do as a law student. And because I teach a course where I teach students how to make basically legal apps, expert systems, so they're sort of like online, very similar to the guided pathway sort of thing, answer a few questions and then the system takes the variables and turns them into a plan for you or a report for you. And I said, this looks like something we could make an app out of. And just spontaneously, a group of students and a couple of alumni got together and started doing just that. So I will show you one of the things we built. Hang on. I'm going to attempt the screen share, so I hope it goes okay. Okay, is that working?
Yes.
Yes, we can see
Perfect.
you.
Okay, so this it may look similar to some of the things on Clio's website, and it really is. But we gathered together a lot of information about applying for the CERB, the income replacement, and we turned that into this expert system. So the way these things work, they have things like hyperlinks. A lot of this links to government website information because they've got pretty good information on their website. But we tried to build this around sort of common questions that people have or problems they have or sort of users' situations. So we started out saying, you know, if you think you can apply, you can probably apply. So just go to the website and apply. And then we had for people who may not be sure, this should give people more information. And one of the tricks with this was we were in the middle of building it and all the rules changed. So you can see this first question was based on the original rules. And one of the criteria was that you had to have no work anymore or no income anymore. And also it had to have happened on or after March 15th. And then there were amendments and that all changed. So we kind of had to, like on the fly, build in the new rules. And then we put in these kind of hover text things for additional information or sort of supplementary information, because we were trying to think, what questions might people have? This was very on the fly. The right way to do this is actually kind of go ask people, but we did it fast and we just tried to put ourselves in their situation and guess. So it became like fairly complicated, probably more complicated than it should be. That's sort of a function of doing it fast and adapting. However, I'm very proud of what we did. It's really cool. One of the ones that I just added in recently was this, for people who are going on maternity leave, because I had been hearing that this is a problem. There was a glitch in the government system where people were being automatically put in EI when they should have been getting CERB. So I'll show you that pathway. Okay, So that if you choose that one, it asks you more about your situation. I'm already on EI. I haven't started my leave, but I lost my job. I should be getting CERB, so this is the thing that was a glitch in the government system, but I got put on EI instead. Or this is another problem that I think the government's aware of, but they haven't fixed it yet. I was going to go on EI, but I lost my job and now I can't make up the hours. So if we pick this one, it just tells you, look, it should be okay and you don't really have to do anything. So you should be switched back to CERB automatically. And links to a couple of outside sources. If you pick this, someone who's in this situation, it should be exactly the same whether or not they're pregnant or about to adopt a child or use maternity benefits. So it then will take you into the same eligibility questions as for CERB generally. So there's now $1,000 a month income threshold. As long as you meet that, there's a couple of other eligibility questions. And the eligibility rules for CERB are quite simple, which is good. And then as long as you meet all those requirements, it will tell you that you're eligible. This will just give people a bit of guidance on getting a CRA account. And another thing that we changed along the way was you can apply through either Service Canada or CRA, but I've been hearing about problems with Service Canada, so we just advised everyone to apply through the CRA, and if they don't accept it, they don't accept it, but it just seems like that's a better way to go. And then at the end, it gives you a report, and that's it. So it's pretty simple. It is, I hope, helpful. I have the link to it. I'll put it in the I can put it in chat or wherever is appropriate if people want to try it. But from my point of view, sort of my selfish point of view, it's a really empowering way to use sort of legal knowledge and legal analytical skills. And of course, a lot of the knowledge isn't really legal, but it's just the skills of pulling together information and turning it into a system that is very much part of the way that lawyers think about dealing with information, and to use that in a constructive way that will get information to people. And I think the students found that sort of like a bit of a lifesaver from our point of view as builders. Back a couple of months ago when everything was crazy and we were just at the beginning of adjusting to all this, I think we all found a real sense of community and coming together and working together on this project, and a sense that we could sort of do something to help, and that was really meaningful. So I think people don't often think about technology that way, and that sort of, I mean, we think of technology as almost like the opposite of human. And our experience with this is it's been a very human thing. It's brought us together, it's created community, and it's given us a way to contribute to the community and use our knowledge helpfully. So I think that's it. Is there anything else? I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Yeah, that's about it. And I'm of course delighted to answer questions about this.
Thank you very much, Katie. So after the presentations, we are going to start the discussion, which will be divided into two subtopics. I'll just wait for, I don't know if Katie, you can stop your, perfect. Perfect, thank you very much. So our discussion will be divided into two subtopics. Our first one is the effects of the pandemic on access to justice and the role that technology has taken to reach the public and maintain services. So our first question, you have touched upon it in your presentations, especially you, Julie. But I would like to know in what manner does the present crisis affect access to justice, and which groups are suffering the most, and what are their main concerns. So I would like to start with you, Jean-Paul, and then we'll continue with Julie and Katie.
Let me first thank you. Katie, I loved in that Covey platform how you there was some warmth in the language in terms of congratulating the person for their pregnancy. I thought that that kind of humane way of using language within a artificial tool is very effective and very beneficial. So that is something that popped up amongst all the great things that both you and Julie presented. So I just wanted to bring that up. Secondly, in response to this question, gonna be honest with you, the second part of it made me a little nervous in answering because, and let me explain why. When we talk about kind of ranking suffering, oppression, or the drawbacks that certain groups are facing, I think that can get into a little tricky territory. So let me say that I'm not going to talk about who is suffering more, but I am going to pull some examples in terms of how this crisis has exacerbated issues that were there before. And I want to talk about this in a two-pronged approach. The first thing is that access to justice and issues around access to justice are not new, but they are certainly highlighted as a result of this pandemic, and the communities that were the most affected, whether it's employment status, race, class, sexual gender identity, immigration status, they are only inflamed because of this pandemic. So on a broader scale, you think about stuff like court backlog, right? Very kind of known access to justice issue. I think before the pandemic, over 100,000 criminal cases in Canada, in Ontario, were waiting for trial and waiting for resolution. That was before the pandemic. Another stat that I found really interesting was 96% of transactions that happen in Ontario courts are on paper. So I think with those two stats by themselves, you get an idea of what the mountain that we are going to have to traverse as we hopefully come out of this pandemic. And I think it's incumbent on us, as I said earlier when I was talking about in the first presentation, to really use this opportunity to actually address those in effective ways. And Katie mentioned Richard Susskind, and he has a interesting differentiation in how we come to these problems. Is it legacy based or is it vision based? So when we're encountering these problems and our ways to solve them, are we improving upon systems and processes and frameworks and paradigms really that are already in place, just thus taking a legacy-based approach? Are we taking a vision-based approach which basically puts a ton of new services and methods of going about this into place? And I don't have the answer nor the expertise to weigh in as to which route is better, but we definitely have to find a route, and we definitely have to pick a way that actually addresses these issues, because as we said, or as I had mentioned, these are solely being inflamed by the pandemic, but they are historical issues in our court systems and our justice system generally. And the last thing I'll say is, we assume a knowledge of what access to justice means, but there is a difference in opinion in what that means, because there is the specific of your day in court, appearing in court, and then there is on the broadest scale, access to justice and justice in a more holistic way, right? Like what does justice mean? And in my view, that is directly tied to being a just society. So we can't look at court systems and court processes in isolation. We have to look about this in a much broader scale. So I'll pass it over to Julia.
Thank you very much. So Julie, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I agree with what was just said. I do think that the pandemic has exacerbated inequalities in access in every way. I think that because people can't get out and visit offices and get help from their local legal clinic or from their local food bank or settlement agency or shelter, it makes it much more difficult for people. And so obviously those who are isolated, those who are, you know, isolated in any number of ways, and those who don't have, often people, I mean, we do have increasing levels of digital access, but not digital literacy. And that often overlays other forms of disadvantage. So it's not usually just, you know, it's people who are low income, often people who don't speak either official language, you know, and then the digital access can be a problem too. And I was just on a phone call this morning with a bunch of sort of community legal clinics and community workers. And despite the fact that probably most people do send emails, even people who live with social disadvantage, most of them are not going to send emails about their problems. They want to call the legal clinic. And so, or they want to call the government if that's the main source of information. And the feedback we get is good luck when you put a phone number on our information, because all of our information has a, you know, next step where you can go for help. We never leave people hanging. Well, we try not to, because we know that the phone numbers often don't work because, you know, there's not enough operators answering. You can be on hold for a long time. One of the most critical phone lines, I think, here that people call the legal aid. I mean, you get the response and say, we'll answer your question in 48 hours. So, I mean, the reliance on technology is going to help us learn to do things differently in a positive way. And it's also going to, at the same time, pose some real problems for people who need a helping human hand.
Thank you very much, Julie. Katie, you can tell.
Yes, well, I agree with all of that. And I had a couple of notes I made to myself to add in. One is just to wholeheartedly agree that technology is not a substitute for human helpers. And I think successful technology projects recognize that it can be a fantastic tool to increase the power that human helpers have to help. But digitizing difficult processes that are not user-friendly doesn't help, right? So I think that's, you know, maybe people are experiencing that in traditional courts, sort of going to video conference hearings and submitting documents online. Okay, that gets around this really sort of hard barrier that you cannot physically go to court, but it doesn't make it easy for people to use. So I think that's a key thing that is built into sort of the most kind of human-centered thinking about this, is that we need human helpers. Technology can make us more efficient, make us free up time from things that perhaps there doesn't need to be one-on-one help with, but it is never going to be a replacement. I really like the legacy and vision distinction, which I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I would sort of chime in with what Jean-Paul said, and say that I do think one is better. I think vision is better than legacy, which is kind of another way of saying, you know, the digitizing the existing pathways isn't necessarily a good thing. It isn't a good thing. And I think that one of the sort of silver linings of this crisis is that the traditional justice system, which does tend to be quite resistant to using new tools and new approaches, has really just been forced to depart from that. There is no choice. There's no option but to use some new technological tools. And that doesn't mean that the system necessarily is forced to adopt a vision mindset as opposed to a legacy mindset, but it has kind of, I think, been a bit of a catalyst, or opened up that door, or maybe broken down a bit of the resistance. It's like the thin end of the wedge. Like once you start, get over the barrier of thinking, well, we do things the traditional way because that's the right way to provide justice to people, and open up to thinking different ways, it makes it a lot harder to use that resistance or that denial, because we have, by force of necessity, had to admit that we can still do it, even if we're doing it differently from the traditional way. And I'm hoping that that may lead to thinking about things in more of a vision, more of a vision approach than a legacy approach. And the initial question was about how the crisis is affecting people's access to justice. So I don't have first-hand knowledge of this because it's not really kind of what I'm involved in, but I have seen a lot of reports that there is expected to be a wave of justice needs, and just kind of echoing what Jean-Paul said about what we mean by access to justice, a broader definition than I need to go to court and have a judge hear my case. People have a lot of problems that have some justice or legal dimension, but many other dimensions. And they're going to have more of those problems, like employment problems, family problems, bankruptcies. There's going to be a huge amount of unmet need that's probably already started, but I expect will probably escalate. So I think there's a lot of potential for well-designed, user-focused technological tools to help fill that gap. But I'll end up where I started, that there's no replacement for human help.
Thank you very much, Katie. So to continue on what you just said, I would like to go to our second topic, which would be issues arising from the development and the use of new technological tools. And I would have a question, which is, how should we approach the new means of communication that we are now using or developing, and what should we take in account when developing a new tool or when communicating with people through technology? So let's start with you, Jean-Paul.
So first, I don't know if this is going to upend the system, but I did see a question about the placement of something like the Civil Resolution Tribunal from BC and other provinces. And I do know that's being considered in Ontario, and I see no reason why it shouldn't be implemented. And the second part of the question, I think, was about a similar framework. And to that, I would point you to the Condominium Authority Tribunal, which is enacted in Ontario, and it's a administrative tribunal whose jurisdiction deals with condominium disputes, specifically about records, using a mediation and ADR platform, but all online. So that's something I would point you to. And secondly, in terms of answering your question, I think Katie spoke to it beautifully in her answer, actually, and it's about the user-friendly piece and the human piece. So when developing technology, the first thing is, the digital literacy piece that Julie talked about, how are we going to ensure that people not only know about it, A, but B, know how to use it once they encounter it? And then when they're encountering it, is it actually providing that perhaps more intangible human element that a lot of people who are seeking help are desiring? And the third, more perhaps more kind of setting up piece in terms of the foundation, I think thinking about things being centralized is really important here, because you don't want to have 18 doors to go to and to explore. When you have a legal problem, you want to be able to open one door, and the first door that you see, go through it and get the help that you need. I think there's a real possibility or trap here of a bunch of well-meaning folks getting really busy and creating a lot of solutions and reinventing the wheels multiple times. So I think it's going to require some major collaboration and breaking down of silos, which again is not a new thing. It's not an innovative idea, but the possibility and risk in creating a bunch of different tools that all speak to the same need and further complicating things, I think, is a really big thing here, and I'll end it there.
Thank you very much. Julie, do you have anything to add?
No, not, I mean, because I thought you said it beautifully, Jean-Paul, in terms of sort of, you know, the user friendliness and looking at digital literacy. Hand in hand with that, I think that what we'll want to make sure we do, and I don't know if this was the question, but is evaluation, some really rigorous evaluation, and looking at different forms of assistance and different forms of tools and asking how, not just about whether people liked them, but also whether they were able to take action at the end of it that they needed to take. I have a lot of questions about our information all the time because it's pretty good, like mostly it's pretty good, but I'm still not convinced that it's enough for people to take action that is meaningful to them. Because often, I mean, we always, as I said before, we have a commitment to connect people with further services, but often they can't access them. And that we really try and make sure that we're connecting people with free, low cost services. I'm still not convinced they can do it. Some people can do it on their own. Some people with a helping hand can do it. And I think a huge number of people are dropped, even with good, extensive, guided pathways information. And that really concerns me. And then the only other thing I'll say in response to Jean-Paul, I agree mostly, I guess, on the, you know, obviously I agree that people shouldn't be reinventing the wheel and duplicating and all that kind of thing. My approach, though, has been very much that people in Ontario, anyway, look for information, look for help from a whole bunch of different pathways. They're not going, the idea of a single stop shop, which is not necessarily what you were saying, by the way, Jean-Paul, but it's just not, it doesn't reflect reality. Not everybody's going to go to our great site, to the LAO great site, to the Ministry of Attorney General. They're going to go, if you're a newcomer to Ontario, you're going to go to the settlement.org, hugely active site. So to me, the vision is not so much centralization, it's more a coordinated approach so that regardless of what door, because there's going to be a million of them that people go, it's sort of just like where they go for help in their community. They might go to this website, they might go that, it might be with their friend. However they get there, that they can still, we need to be coordinated enough that we're sharing our information and they can maybe get to the same information through that door. So it's coordinated, but not that you just say, okay, let's just make sure, and I'm not sure you were saying this, Jean-Paul, but not sort of to put centralization, I don't think, I think centralization / coordination, I guess, is the way I would describe what I think reflects how people look for help and information.
Thank you very much. Katie, do you have anything to add?
I wanted to say a little bit about the Civil Resolution Tribunal because I have been burying myself in that so much. And I think, so I'm just going to really just sound like a fangirl. I'm supposed to be an objective researcher, but I think they're doing it right. And I think what they're doing is a practical example of an answer to your question, right? Like, how do you design these processes? And so it's a nice kind of example to look at and see, well, what does that look like in practice? And a couple of things it looks like in practice are what Jean-Paul said: build around users, start with users, involve users all the way. And that is built into their process. The system was set up after consultations with members of the public and community advocates. So it wasn't sort of, let's build something and see how people like it and then maybe change some stuff. They started that right from the start, from the foundations. What do you need? What should this look like? What are the first questions that you or the people you work with are going to think of? And that's kind of in the DNA. Another thing that was also mentioned, I think, by Julie, is the sort of feedback and interaction. So Shannon Salter, who's the chair, talks, I'm sure it's not her phrase, but she talks about the commitment to continuous improvement. So the CRT website, every month they report the results of their user satisfaction survey. And they use that information, they tell everyone about it, and then they use it to make changes. So since the CRT started, it's only been operating since 2016. They've changed their rules, I think, 3 times. And it's pretty much always in reaction to user feedback. If people are telling them this was difficult or this was a bottleneck, if they can change the rules to address it, then they do. And another aspect of that is a bit more like the analytics that Julie was showing us on their website. Because the contrast to courts is extraordinary. Courts are a little bit of a black box. We don't really know what happens to people, once they file an action or even before they file an action. The only kind of data point really is a judgment, if there is one. And in the CRT, it's because it's digital, it automatically sort of keeps track of how people work through the process. At the beginning in the Solution Explorer, it's anonymous, but you can still see, for example, where there are drop-off points. And that can be taken into account for continuous improvement too. If it looks like a particular resource is getting a lot of, they have like little, was this helpful questions. And if something's getting a lot of, no, it wasn't helpful, they can change it. If there's a point in the process where a lot of people are dropping off, they can think about why. Is that because they got the answer they needed and they're done? Or is it because there's something else that's causing people to drop off, and can it be addressed? Those kinds of tools, and really it's more than that, it's a mindset, I think is just an excellent example of how to make digital justice tools work for people.
Thank you very much. So seeing the time, we are going to open the question section for the public. So for the time being, I don't see any questions. I'm going to give a couple of seconds for anybody who has questions to write them in, and we will be taking questions.
Can I just respond to Julie in the meantime?
Yes, go ahead, Jean-Paul. Yes.
Yeah. So totally fair qualification and response, Julie. Let me just give you a little bit of background into my thinking. I have such a strong desire since I worked at MAG, the Ministry of Attorney General, for that platform and website, frankly, to be better and to have more information and to have really basically your beautiful, fantastic, well-resourced site on there. So that's where what I'm thinking about in terms of centralization, right? Because what is the role of a attorney general website if not to act in the public interest and disseminate knowledge that is that the public is desiring? So that's that should give context as to my answer. That's really what I was thinking about. So I just wanted to add that nuance a little bit.
Can I say something just quickly in response to that?
Yes, Julie, go ahead.
And that's so interesting to me, because what we did with Steps to Justice, because we had so many justice partners participate in the development of the whole site a couple of years ago, including the Ministry of the Attorney General. So what we ended up doing is we created an embed function where organizations can embed sections, and it lives live. It looks like it's on their site, and it's not just a link, it's an embed, and they can present the whole site or sections if they're, a workers' action center. And so the Law Society has embeds from Steps to Justice, I forget, I think there's 50 or 60 organizations that embed. Ministry of Attorney General, not yet, because even though they were all keen on it, which is sort of what you described as the vision for you when you worked there, because they're overhauling all the Ontario government sites and they have to look the same. And so, I think they said, hold off for a couple of years and we may be able to be a little more flexible and bring in the embeds after all. But I do think, I think I agree with you. I think that's the way to go.
Well, our current Attorney General in Ontario called the justice website, the justice system right now in this province, Pioneer Village. So I think he has an awareness that there are changes such as that need to be made. So I'm hopeful, and that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Sudbury Community Legal Clinic. Can you give us your input on how to provide access to justice to seniors, those in LTC homes on lockdown, and the seniors in the community? Is there anybody who would like to take the question?
Well, I mean, I would be interested because to hear what that the person asking the question, what thoughts they have. I mean, for us, we often try and we try and reach families of people in those. I mean, we would both try and reach the residents themselves because we produce a lot of, for example, print materials that senior residences order and distribute to their to the people who live there. And then we also try and get that we try and reach family members and staff people so that they can pass on the information they may get through online access. So we're going to be doing, for example, I think a big training webinar for staff at those homes about the new powers of attorney tool, thinking that might be a good way both to reach seniors directly, but often because seniors tend to be less digitally literate, but not always, of course, that's changing. But we always try and do things through multiple pathways, but I don't think that was too helpful. Anyway, but that's my take.
Thank you very much. Would anybody have anything else to add? If not, we have another question, which comes from Kiana. Can the Civil Resolution Tribunal platform be easily transferred to another province? Have there been any provinces showing interest to adopt the platform?
So I think we answered that a bit earlier. If Julie or Katie want to add to that, but if not, it's earlier in the webinar. Sure.
I thought maybe Katie would have something to add.
I think Jean-Paul answered it. I mean, I'm an outsider, so I'm not privy to the discussions, but I think there are some discussions going on about licensing the technology that, sort of heard percolating around out there. Mm-hmm. I'll say that I think that the adoption of this kind of approach in many jurisdictions is a lot more likely now than it was 3 months ago. I think that the benefit of having a place to go to resolve disputes that just kept operating on March 17th, the same as it did on March 10th, suddenly is a lot more apparent to everybody around the world. And some of the sort of cultural resistance within the justice system to going that route has reduced. So that's, I think that will factor into it. And of course, I mean, in terms of translating it into other jurisdictions, there aren't really obstacles to doing that other than cultural resistance. And it does take some investment, right? I mean, one of the, I think, sources of resistance here in BC is that there was a lot of funding put into getting the Civil Resolution Tribunal off the ground. I think it's very good value for money, but every one of those public dollars could be used for something else, and people are sort of saying, well, why isn't there more funding for the courts, and why isn't there more funding for legal aid? If you have it for this, why can't you use it for that? So there are those kinds of arguments, but in principle, it can be used in any jurisdiction and kind of for anything, right? Like this general approach using the expert systems like the Solution Explorer, you can use for health questions, not just for legal questions. You can use for any sort of automation of expert knowledge.
Thank you very much, Katie.
Thomas, on the Civil Resolution Tribunal, I just want to say to Kiana and all the other participants that we do have a webinar next week on the May 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time with Richard Rogers, the Executive Director of the CRT, which is called Improving Access to Justice Through User-Focused ODR. So if you have any question for him, please come to that webinar on the May 20th.
Thank you very much, Maria. So I think we don't have any more new questions.
I saw one about the CRB and disability, and I'll quickly answer that, and anyone else can jump in. So the answer is yes, as long as you stop working as a result of COVID and you meet the other eligibility criteria. Disability and CRB are not mutually exclusive. But I would encourage you to go to Substance Justice and get more information.
Yeah. I saw one about EI, and if we were going to have an app type guide for EI. So I thought I'd address that. And
Go ahead.
So I will say first, I'd really like to, and there is, I think when we first jumped into this, we were thinking one-stop shop. We thought we'll make one app for people that can find out all the benefits that they're eligible for. Yeah, that was sort of a naive dream because you can see how complicated just the CERB one got, and that's a relatively simple benefit, but people's lives are complicated. There's lots of different permutations. Anyone who has ever had any contact whatsoever with the EI system knows it is really complicated. So in principle, I think this kind of approach could definitely be applied. It's actually what it's really good for making very complex information like that easier to navigate through. And so you can find the stuff that's relevant to your situation and not have to hack through a forest of complicated rules. To do it in practice well, we would need to spend a fair bit of time on it and have some real expertise. I think I could imagine working on that with a team of students and sort of maybe a couple of lawyers who are expert in the area. And this is a process that is called legal knowledge engineering, where you kind of get the expertise out of the people's heads and then you build it into your machine. So that it's accessible on a one-to-many and asynchronous basis, so people can access that expertise anytime. So I love the idea of doing that, and maybe we will, but we probably aren't doing it next week because just to do it properly and not give people the wrong answers takes some time and care, just because the rules are super complex.
Thank you.
No, I just want to do a plug. I'm not involved with this, but there is an initiative by the Action Committee on Civil and Family Matters that is basically aggregating all the innovative measures that respective provinces and organizations and individuals within them are taking and have taken since the pandemic. You can find it on their Twitter feed, and it's basically a Google form. And so they're bringing all these together, which I think is a great initiative. And we talk about coordination, it speaks to that. So I would just do a plug for that for anyone in the audience. And as well as my fellow panelists to maybe consider submitting to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Paul. I'll finish here. I would like to say to everybody, have a nice day, have a nice evening, and thank you very much for being here.
Yes,
thanks so much.
During these unsettling times.